The smallest purchase was the one that changed everything. Nathaniel Brooks had built a fortune by believing one simple rule: give people unlimited money, and sooner or later they would reveal exactly who they were. That belief had earned him billions, transformed struggling companies into global giants, and made his name synonymous with ruthless judgment. It had never failed him before. Yet tonight, standing alone inside the glass-walled conference room overlooking Manhattan, he found himself staring at a single line on a financial statement that refused to make sense. 3 black cards had burned through staggering amounts of money in less than 24 hours. Luxury boutiques, jewelry houses on Fifth Avenue, exotic car dealerships, designer fashion, private appointments hidden behind velvet curtains. Every purchase confirmed what he had expected. Every transaction reinforced the theory that unlimited opportunity simply magnified hidden desires. Then his eyes stopped on the 4th statement. $12.47. Nathaniel leaned closer, convinced someone had made a clerical error. He adjusted his reading glasses, refreshed the report twice, and checked the card number again. Same account, same name, same total, $12.47. He slowly lowered the paper onto the polished walnut table. The silence surrounding him felt strangely heavy. Outside, thousands of office lights sparkled across the skyline like stars trapped inside steel towers. But for the first time in years, Nathaniel barely noticed the view. Impossible, he whispered under his breath. He had personally instructed the bank to remove every spending limit from all 4 cards. Each woman had been told exactly the same thing. Buy whatever you believe you deserve. No restrictions. No explanations. No consequences. Every receipt would be approved. Every purchase would be honored. It was supposed to be the perfect measure of character. Yet one woman had somehow broken the equation before it even reached its conclusion. Nathaniel reached for the surveillance tablet resting beside the statements. 4 small video windows appeared across the screen. 3 of them displayed endless scenes of polished marble floors, luxury shopping bags, smiling sales associates, and glittering display cases reflecting fortunes under bright lights. The 4th window showed something entirely different. A quiet sidewalk, a neighborhood convenience store, a woman carrying a simple reusable shopping bag. No jewelry, no designer labels, no excitement, just calm, deliberate steps that somehow unsettled him far more than extravagance ever could. His finger hovered over the screen, ready to replay every second of her day, when his assistant's voice interrupted from the doorway. "The guests have arrived, sir." Nathaniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on that frozen image. Claire Bennett, 26 years old, housekeeper, employed at Brooks Estate for exactly 23 days. Background entirely ordinary. No criminal record. No financial history worth mentioning. Quiet, efficient, almost invisible. He remembered walking past her countless times without learning the color of her eyes. She always seemed to blend into the background, moving silently through hallways that people like him rarely noticed. Invisible people, he often believed, rarely changed anything. Tonight, that assumption felt dangerously fragile. Nathaniel finally looked toward the door. "Bring them in," he said quietly. Within seconds, the room filled with soft footsteps, expensive perfume, confident smiles, and carefully rehearsed excitement. 3 women entered carrying glossy shopping bags that nearly covered the conference table as they sat down. They laughed politely, exchanging proud glances, each convinced she had understood the assignment better than the others. Nathaniel acknowledged them with a brief nod before allowing his gaze to drift toward the final empty chair. Seconds later, the door opened once more. Claire Bennett stepped inside wearing the same modest navy dress she had worn the day before. There were no shopping bags in her hands, no designer boxes, no jewelry sparkling beneath the lights, only a neatly folded envelope and the same calm expression she always carried. She quietly took her seat without looking around the room. Nathaniel glanced once more at the mysterious $12.47 transaction resting on the report before lifting his eyes to meet hers. For reasons he couldn't explain, the smallest receipt on the table had already become the heaviest. Claire folded her hands neatly over the plain white envelope while the other women arranged glossy shopping bags around their chairs like trophies waiting for applause. Soft laughter drifted through the conference room, blending with the quiet hum of the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nathaniel Brooks remained standing at the head of the table, saying nothing. He had learned long ago that silence often invited people to reveal more than questions ever could. One by one, the women began exchanging stories about exclusive boutiques, private fitting rooms, limited edition collections, and appointments that ordinary customers could never reserve. Every sentence carried the excitement of dreams suddenly becoming reality. Nathaniel listened without interruption. Their enthusiasm did not surprise him. It confirmed years of carefully observed patterns. Unlimited access usually produced unlimited desire. He reached for the first financial statement and glanced at the total before placing it back onto the table. $2,318,000. The owner of the card smiled proudly. She explained that she had invested in timeless luxury because quality always held value. Nathaniel simply nodded. The second statement showed nearly $1,800,000 spent on rare watches, custom jewelry, and international travel reservations. The explanation came quickly. Experiences, she insisted, mattered more than possessions. Nathaniel acknowledged her answer with the same unreadable expression. The third statement carried a total slightly above $3 million. Luxury vehicles, designer wardrobes, and advanced deposits on an oceanfront property. She smiled with confidence and declared that opportunity should never be wasted when someone offered it freely. Nathaniel thanked her politely before sliding the final report to the center of the table. The room became noticeably quieter. $12.47. No one spoke for several seconds. One woman laughed softly, assuming it had to be a printing mistake. Another suggested that the bank must have frozen the account. Nathaniel looked directly at Claire. The account was fully active the entire time, he said. Every purchase would have been approved instantly. Claire met his eyes with calm composure. I know, sir. Her voice was gentle but steady. You understood the instructions. Yes, sir. By whatever you believe you deserve. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. Then why did you spend less than the price of lunch? Claire lowered her eyes toward the envelope resting beneath her fingertips. Because that was all I needed yesterday. The answer settled over the room like fresh snow. No drama. No apology. Just quiet certainty. Nathaniel had interviewed world leaders, negotiated with billion-dollar investors, and questioned executives whose companies depended upon his decisions. Very few people answered difficult questions without adding unnecessary words. Claire did exactly that. It unsettled him. He opened the transaction details once again. One purchase. A neighborhood grocery store less than 3 miles from Brooks' estate. Bread, milk, eggs, a can of chicken soup, fresh apples. Total after tax, $12.47. He looked back at Claire. Was that really everything? She nodded once. Yes, sir. I returned the card afterward because I had finished using it. Across the table, someone shook her head in disbelief. Another quietly whispered that no sensible person would walk away from an unlimited black card. Claire did not react. She simply waited, her posture unchanged, as though opinions carried no weight beside a peaceful conscience. Nathaniel noticed something unexpected. The envelope she held was slightly worn at the edges, as if it had traveled with her throughout the day. There was no company logo, no expensive stationery, just ordinary white paper carefully sealed. He found himself more curious about that simple envelope than every luxury purchase surrounding it. The smallest transaction had already challenged his expectations. Somehow he sensed the unopened envelope was about to challenge something much deeper. Nathaniel slowly extended his hand toward the envelope, but instead of opening it immediately, he studied Claire for another quiet moment. There was no nervous tapping of her fingers, no anxious smile, no attempt to persuade him. She simply waited with the same patient stillness she carried while polishing antique furniture or arranging fresh flowers throughout Brooks' estate every morning before sunrise. It suddenly occurred to him that he knew almost nothing about the woman who had worked inside his home for nearly a month. He knew the silver in the dining room had to face exactly the same direction. He knew every painting hanging in his penthouse by the artist's full name. He knew quarterly earnings from companies he had not personally visited in years. Yet he did not know the story of the woman standing only a few feet away. He finally broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It was not a letter asking for money. It was not a resignation. It was a carefully handwritten inventory. Every item purchased with the black card had been listed in neat blue ink. 1 loaf of whole wheat bread, 1 gallon of milk, 1 dozen eggs, 1 can of chicken soup. For apples. At the bottom of the page, another line had been added. Remaining balance available, untouched. Thank you for your trust. Nathaniel looked up, unable to hide his confusion. This tells me what you bought, he said quietly. It does not tell me why. Claire smiled gently, almost apologetically. Because you did not ask me to explain yesterday. You only asked me to buy what I believed I deserved. One of the women across the table let out a quiet laugh. That cannot possibly be all you wanted. Claire turned toward her politely. Wanting and needing are not always the same thing. The room fell silent once again. Nathaniel rested both hands on the polished table. His instincts told him there was another layer beneath every answer she offered. He had spent decades recognizing hidden value where others saw nothing. The same instinct now whispered that Claire Bennett was hiding something far more meaningful than ambition. He pressed a button on the conference table. The lights dimmed slightly as the wall behind him transformed into a large display screen. Security footage from the previous day appeared. The timestamp began exactly 24 hours earlier. 3 of the women smiled as they recognized themselves entering luxury boutiques surrounded by personal shoppers. Claire's recording appeared in the 4th corner of the screen. She walked alone beneath gray autumn skies, carrying the black card inside a simple canvas wallet. She passed expensive stores without slowing down. She crossed busy intersections. She ignored bright advertisements promising exclusive collections and once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. Nathaniel watched carefully. Every choice seemed intentional. Finally, she entered the same neighborhood grocery store shown on the receipt. The camera followed her through narrow aisles. She compared prices instead of brands. She selected fresh fruit one piece at a time. She returned a larger carton of milk after noticing a smaller one cost less and would not be wasted. Even the cashier smiled as Claire thanked her by name before leaving with one modest paper bag. Nathaniel frowned. This was not the behavior of someone overwhelmed by unlimited wealth. It was the habit of someone who respected every dollar, even when the dollars did not belong to her. Then another camera angle appeared outside the store. Claire never walked toward Brooks Estate. Instead, she turned down a quiet residential street lined with aging brick apartment buildings. She climbed 3 flights of worn stairs and disappeared through the door of a modest apartment. Nathaniel leaned forward without realizing it. That address was nowhere in her employment records. The recording continued. Nearly an hour later, Claire emerged carrying the now empty grocery bag, locking the apartment carefully behind her before returning to work as though nothing unusual had happened. Nathaniel paused the video. The conference room felt different now. Curiosity had quietly replaced judgment. For the first time since creating the experiment, he was no longer asking what Claire had bought. He was asking who had shared the meal she had quietly chosen instead of an unlimited fortune. The image on the screen remained frozen outside the modest apartment building, and no one in the conference room seemed eager to break the silence. Nathaniel tapped the remote once, allowing the recording to continue. Claire reappeared almost 40 minutes later carrying nothing except the empty paper grocery bag folded neatly beneath her arm. She locked the apartment door with quiet care, glanced down the hallway to make certain the lights had been turned off, and then walked back toward the subway station with the same calm pace she carried every morning inside Brooks Estate. There was no celebration in her expression, no sign that she had just been trusted with unlimited wealth. She looked exactly like someone returning from an ordinary errand. Nathaniel paused the recording again. He looked toward Claire. Who lives there? He asked softly. Claire answered without hesitation. My grandmother, sir. She is 83 years old. Nathaniel blinked. Your employment file says no immediate family. Claire offered a gentle smile. It asked for dependents, not everyone I love. A few quiet chuckles echoed around the room before fading just as quickly. Nathaniel looked back at the address displayed on the screen. Does she know about the black card? Claire slowly shook her head. No, sir. She only knows I stopped by with groceries after work. Nathaniel studied her face, searching for any sign of performance, but found only quiet sincerity. Why did you not tell her? Claire looked toward the window where the afternoon sun reflected against neighboring skyscrapers. Because if she knew I had access to unlimited money for one day, she would have worried that I might become someone else. The answer settled heavily across the room. Nathaniel had spent years hearing polished speeches from politicians, executives, celebrities, and investors. Most people spoke to impress. Claire spoke as though she had forgotten anyone else was listening. One of the women sitting nearby crossed her arms. That still does not explain why you ignored the opportunity. Most people would have changed their lives forever. Claire turned politely toward her. Maybe, but one day cannot build the kind of life that lasts forever. Another woman leaned forward. You could have bought a house. Claire nodded. Yes, but I would still need to become the person capable of keeping it. You could have bought a luxury car. Claire smiled again. I already have transportation that gets me to work on time every day. You could have bought designer clothes. Claire looked down at the simple navy dress she wore. These are clean. They fit. I have never believed that fabric changes character. Nathaniel remained unusually quiet. Every answer seemed simple, yet each one chipped away at beliefs he had carried for decades. Success had taught him to evaluate people by decisions made under pressure. Yet Claire had been given absolute freedom instead of pressure, and somehow her choices revealed even more. He pressed another button on the remote. A second security angle appeared from Brooks' estate later that same evening. Claire entered through the staff entrance exactly 5 minutes before her shift began. She placed her lunch container inside the employee refrigerator, changed into her housekeeping uniform, and immediately noticed a maintenance worker struggling to carry several heavy storage boxes into the service hallway. Without saying a word, she set down her own belongings, walked over, and helped organize every box before quietly beginning her scheduled duties. She never mentioned the black card. She never spoke about the experiment. She never hinted that she had spent the previous day holding financial power greater than most people would ever experience. Nathaniel watched in thoughtful silence. Then he noticed something almost everyone else had missed. Before Claire disappeared into the hallway, she reached inside her pocket and carefully removed a folded grocery receipt. She looked at it for only a second before placing it inside a small notebook she carried every day. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. That ordinary receipt was not being kept as proof of spending. Somehow, he sensed it represented something far more valuable than $12.47. And for the first time since becoming one of the richest men in America, he found himself wondering whether the greatest wealth in the room belonged to the one person who had almost nothing. The conference room remained unusually quiet as Nathaniel slowly reached for the small notebook that had appeared on the security footage. He looked toward Claire before speaking. May I see it? She nodded without hesitation, slipped the notebook from the pocket of her housekeeping apron folded neatly inside her tote bag, and handed it across the table with both hands. The cover was worn from daily use. The corners had softened with time. It was not the kind of notebook someone bought to impress anyone. Nathaniel opened it carefully. Every page contained handwritten lists, weekly grocery budgets, utility payments, medication reminders for her grandmother, bus schedules, cleaning supply prices from different stores. Tiny calculations filled the margins, each one adding and subtracting only a few dollars at a time. He continued turning the pages until he found yesterday's grocery receipt secured with a small piece of transparent tape. Underneath it, Claire had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. Never forget that enough is a beautiful word. Nathaniel stopped reading. He stared at those 7 words much longer than he intended. They carried no dramatic flourish, no attempt to sound wise. They simply reflected a belief that had quietly guided someone's entire life. He looked back at Claire. Did someone teach you this? Claire smiled softly. My grandmother did. Every Sunday, she would tell me that people become poor twice. First when they lose money, then when they forget what enough looks like. Nathaniel slowly closed the notebook. Those words echoed somewhere deep inside memories he had not visited in decades. Before private jets, before boardrooms, before magazine covers. He remembered his own mother clipping coupons at the kitchen table while telling him never to waste food because someone had worked hard to grow it. Success had gradually buried those memories beneath layers of contracts, acquisitions, and endless ambition. He had convinced himself that winning required constantly wanting more. Claire had somehow preserved a lesson he had long ago abandoned. One of the women sitting nearby shifted uncomfortably. So you were saying you never dreamed about being rich? Claire answered with complete honesty. Of course I have dreamed about financial security. I have dreamed about paying every bill without counting dollars. I have dreamed about seeing my grandmother smile without worrying about medicine. But I have never dreamed about owning things simply because other people would admire them. There was no judgment in her voice, only quiet conviction. Nathaniel noticed that no one interrupted her now. Even the women who had proudly displayed their purchases earlier seemed more interested in listening than defending themselves. He returned to the financial statements spread across the polished table. Millions of dollars had purchased beautiful objects. $12.47 had revealed an entire philosophy of life. The contrast unsettled him in ways quarterly reports never could. His assistant quietly approached and placed another folder beside him. "Sir, these are the additional background notes you requested this morning." Nathaniel opened the file almost absent-mindedly. Inside were employment references from previous housekeeping positions. Every supervisor described Claire using nearly identical words. Dependable, honest, thoughtful, never wastes supplies, always leaves a place better than she found it. One handwritten note from an elderly homeowner caught his attention. "Claire does not simply clean rooms. She restores peace to them." Nathaniel read the sentence twice. It sounded strangely impossible until he remembered walking through Brooks' estate over the past 3 weeks. Fresh flowers always seemed to appear before guests arrived. Family photographs were dusted with unusual care. Even forgotten books somehow returned to the exact shelves where he remembered leaving them years earlier. He had assumed those details happened automatically. They never had. Someone had quietly chosen them every single day. Nathaniel closed the folder and looked once more at Claire Bennett. The experiment had been designed to discover what people would do when given unlimited money. Instead, it was beginning to reveal something far more uncomfortable. He had spent years measuring people by the size of their opportunities, yet he had almost overlooked the extraordinary character of the person who quietly improved his own life every morning without ever asking to be noticed. The conference room felt different now. The polished marble, the panoramic skyline, the carefully arranged reports on the table had not changed, yet the atmosphere no longer belonged to a financial experiment. It had become something far more personal. Nathaniel Brooks slowly removed his glasses and rested them beside the notebook. For several quiet seconds, he simply watched Claire Bennett. She did not lower her eyes. She did not seek approval. She waited with the same calm patience that had quietly followed her through every answer she had given. Nathaniel finally spoke. "Claire, when I created this test, I believed money removed every mask. I thought people would reveal who they truly were the moment limits disappeared." Claire listened without interrupting. He continued in a softer voice. "But I am beginning to wonder whether I designed the wrong experiment." Before Claire could answer, his assistant stepped forward again carrying a sealed envelope marked confidential. "Sir, this arrived from Human Resources an hour ago. It concerns Miss Bennett." Nathaniel accepted the file and opened it carefully. Inside was a recommendation letter from the director of a neighborhood community center where Claire had volunteered every Saturday for almost 4 years. The letter described how she quietly organized food drives, cleaned classrooms after children's programs, repaired donated furniture instead of replacing it, and often stayed long after everyone else had gone home. One sentence immediately captured Nathaniel's attention. "Claire never asks what she can receive. She always asks what still needs to be done." Nathaniel looked up slowly. "You never mentioned any of this during your interview." Claire answered with a small smile. "You were hiring a housekeeper, sir, not a storyteller." The simple reply caused even Nathaniel's assistant to smile. One of the women sitting across the table looked genuinely puzzled. "But why keep doing all of that when nobody notices?" Claire folded her hands gently. "Because the floor is still cleaner even if nobody watches it being swept. The children still have books even if nobody knows who carried the boxes. Kindness does not become more valuable because someone applauds it." The room grew silent once again. Nathaniel found himself remembering something he had almost forgotten. Years ago, before his first company became successful, he had spent weekends repainting his tiny office by himself because hiring contractors was beyond his budget. Back then, every small improvement mattered because he believed the work itself had dignity. Somewhere between his first million and his first billion, he had gradually begun measuring success by numbers instead of quiet effort. He pressed another button on the remote. A different security recording appeared from Brooks' estate. It showed Claire finishing her scheduled duties late one evening after every other employee had already gone home. Instead of leaving immediately, she noticed a vase of fresh white lilies beginning to wilt near the entrance hall. She quietly replaced the water, trimmed the stems, rearranged the flowers, and stepped back to admire them for only a second before turning off the lights. Nathaniel stared at the screen. Those lilies had been placed there every Monday since his late mother's birthday. He had assumed the florist maintained them throughout the week. Apparently, Claire had been doing it herself. Why? He asked almost instinctively. Claire hesitated for the first time. Your mother loved white lilies, did she not? Nathaniel looked at her with surprise. How do you know that? There is an old photograph in the library. She is holding the same flowers. Every Monday someone delivers fresh ones. I thought, perhaps they deserve to remain beautiful for as long as possible. Nathaniel felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He had walked past those flowers hundreds of times without noticing they had quietly lasted longer because someone cared enough to replace the water every evening. Claire had never mentioned it. She had never expected gratitude. She had simply seen something worth preserving. Nathaniel slowly realized that the greatest surprise of the entire experiment had nothing to do with a black card or $12.47. It was the uncomfortable discovery that the person who understood the true value of his home had never actually owned it, while the man who owned every room had stopped truly seeing what was inside them. The silence lingered long after the last security recording faded from the screen. Nathaniel Brooks slowly walked away from the conference table and toward the enormous windows overlooking Manhattan. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the glass towers below, reminding him of every deal he had closed, every company he had acquired, and every award that now filled the walls of his office. For years he had believed success was measured by how much value a person could create. Standing there now, he quietly wondered whether he had spent too little time asking how much value a person quietly protected. Without turning around, he spoke. Claire, tell me something honestly. If I had never given you that black card, would yesterday have been any different? Claire considered the question before answering. Yes, sir. Nathaniel looked over his shoulder, surprised. How? I would have bought the same groceries with my own paycheck. It simply would have taken me a little longer. The words landed with unexpected force. Nathaniel turned fully toward her. You still would have gone to see your grandmother? Every Wednesday after work, she replied. We always have dinner together. It has been our routine since I was 16 years old. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Then the card did not change your priorities. No, sir. It only changed whose money paid for dinner. Another long silence settled across the room. One of the women who had spent nearly $3 million lowered her eyes toward the designer handbag resting beside her chair. It suddenly looked less like a victory than it had an hour earlier. Nathaniel returned to the head of the table and picked up one of the black cards still lying beside the financial reports. The polished black surface reflected the ceiling lights like a small mirror. He had always considered the card a symbol of unlimited possibilities. Claire had somehow transformed it into something entirely different. A simple tool, nothing more. He looked directly at her. What if I told you that you could keep the card permanently? The room became perfectly still. Even his assistant looked up with surprise. Claire did not reach for the card. Instead, she asked a question that Nathaniel had not expected. Would it still belong to you? Nathaniel frowned slightly. Technically, yes. Then I could never truly call anything I purchased my own. Nathaniel stared at her for several seconds. Most people would have accepted the offer before he finished the sentence. Claire had politely declined without a trace of hesitation. Why does that matter so much? He asked. Claire folded her hands together. Because gratitude should never become dependence. I want every home I live in, every chair I sit on, and every meal I eat to remind me of work I was willing to do, not favors I happened to receive. Nathaniel felt those words settle somewhere deep inside him. He remembered the first desk he had assembled by hand in a rented office barely larger than a storage room. It had been inexpensive and slightly uneven, but every scratch on its surface reminded him that he had earned it. Over the years, he had replaced that desk with furniture carved from rare hardwoods shipped across oceans. Somehow none of them had carried the same meaning. Claire continued quietly. Kindness is a beautiful gift, sir. But dignity is something each person must build for themselves. You cannot hand it to someone, even with unlimited money. Nathaniel lowered the black card back onto the table. For the first time since creating the experiment, he realized he had misunderstood its purpose completely. He had assumed the cards would expose the character of four women. Instead, every conversation had become a mirror reflecting his own assumptions. He had entered the room expecting to judge. Now he found himself listening, learning, and questioning beliefs that had guided him for decades. As the afternoon light slowly shifted across the conference table, Nathaniel understood that the most valuable lesson of the entire experiment had never appeared on a bank statement. It had quietly arrived in the calm voice of a woman who possessed almost nothing except principles she refused to sell, no matter how much money someone placed in front of her. No one reached for the shopping bags anymore. The luxury boxes that had filled the conference room with excitement only an hour earlier now sat quietly beside their owners, almost forgotten. Nathaniel Brooks slowly gathered the 4 black cards and aligned them in a perfect row across the polished walnut table. Their dark surfaces reflected the afternoon light, but they no longer represented power in his mind. They represented 4 different ways of seeing the world. He rested his fingertips on the final card before looking toward Claire once again. "There is one last question I need answered," he said. Claire nodded gently. "If you had discovered that this entire experiment was only a test of character, would you have done anything differently?" She answered almost immediately. "No, sir." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "Not even knowing that your future might depend on it." Claire smiled with quiet warmth. "Especially then. Character that changes because someone is watching is only performance." The words settled over the room with remarkable stillness. Nathaniel slowly leaned back in his chair. For years he had interviewed executives who rehearsed perfect answers, consultants who memorized leadership philosophies, and candidates who spoke confidently about integrity. Yet the simplest definition of character he had ever heard had come from a woman whose job description involved polishing floors and organizing linen closets. He looked toward his assistant. "Cancel the remainder of today's meetings. Every one of them." The assistant blinked in surprise. "Sir, the investment committee has already arrived downstairs." Nathaniel folded his hands calmly. "They can wait. I have postponed conversations worth billions before. I am not postponing one that may be worth more." The room remained silent as he opened a drawer built into the conference table. From inside, he removed a leather folder embossed with the Brooks Foundation crest. Very few people in the company had ever seen it. Nathaniel placed the folder in front of Claire. "I created this foundation 12 years ago after my mother passed away," he said quietly. "It funds scholarships, neighborhood restoration projects, food assistance programs, and emergency grants. Every year we distribute tens of millions of dollars." Claire listened respectfully, but did not touch the folder. Nathaniel continued. "We have accountants who protect the money, lawyers who protect the structure, executives who protect the reputation. But I have spent years searching for someone who could protect the purpose." He slowly pushed the folder toward her. "I believe I have finally found that person." Claire looked down at the folder before lifting her eyes again. "Sir, I do not have experience managing a foundation." Nathaniel gave a faint smile. "You have something far more difficult to teach. You know the difference between enough and more. Most organizations fail because the people leading them forget that difference." One of the women at the table quietly asked, "You would trust someone with almost no financial background to oversee millions of dollars?" Nathaniel answered without taking his eyes off Claire. "I have spent my career trusting people who understood money. Today I met someone who understands people. That may be rarer." Claire remained silent for several long moments. She looked out toward the skyline where the late afternoon sun painted the buildings in soft shades of gold. When she finally spoke, her voice remained as calm as ever. "If I accepted, I would ask for one condition." Nathaniel nodded. "Name it." "I would like to continue visiting my grandmother every Wednesday evening." Nathaniel laughed softly for the first time all day, a genuine laugh that surprised even himself. "That is your condition?" Claire smiled. "Promises kept over many years should never be exchanged for promotions." Nathaniel extended his hand across the table. "Then every Wednesday evening belongs to your grandmother. The foundation will simply plan around it." Claire accepted the handshake with quiet gratitude, not triumph. There was no celebration in her expression because she had never entered the room hoping to win anything. As Nathaniel looked around the conference table one final time, he realized the experiment had ended in a way he could never have predicted. 3 black cards had purchased extraordinary possessions. The 4th had purchased almost nothing at all. Yet somehow the woman who spent the least had given everyone else in the room the most valuable gift of the day. She had reminded them that wealth could open doors, but only character determined what kind of person walked through them. 6 months passed with the quiet confidence of seasons changing. The headlines never mentioned the meeting that had transformed Nathaniel Brooks far more than it had transformed Claire Bennett. Newspapers celebrated the Brooks Foundation for launching new scholarship programs, restoring neighborhood libraries, expanding food assistance, and helping small community centers remain open. Business magazines praised Nathaniel's renewed commitment to long-term social investment, calling it a brilliant strategic evolution. They analyzed numbers, budgets, and economic impact. None of them knew that the most important change had begun with a grocery receipt worth $12.47. Every Wednesday evening, just as promised, Claire left the foundation office at 5 o'clock sharp. No meeting was ever scheduled during that time. Nathaniel personally instructed every executive to protect that appointment with the same importance as a board meeting. At first, many employees found the rule unusual. Eventually, they understood. Some commitments generated profit. Others preserved character. Nathaniel had finally learned the difference. Inside the foundation headquarters, Claire changed very little about herself. She still carried the same worn notebook. She still packed simple lunches from home. She still thanked the custodians by name every morning and often stayed after work to straighten chairs before community events. The title on her office door had changed, but the habits that had earned it never did. New employees were often surprised to discover that the executive director quietly refilled the coffee machine if she noticed it was empty or helped carry donated books, without asking anyone else to do it first. She never explained those choices. She simply believed leadership should make work lighter for others, not heavier. One afternoon, Nathaniel walked through the foundation building after a meeting and noticed Claire kneeling beside a young volunteer whose stack of donated school supplies had accidentally tipped onto the floor. Without a word, she helped organize every notebook, every pencil, and every backpack before the volunteer could even apologize. Nathaniel stood in the hallway watching for a moment before continuing on. Months earlier, he might never have noticed such a small act. Now he realized that character was often revealed in moments too ordinary for applause. Later that evening, he opened the top drawer of his desk and found the 4 black cards still resting inside their original presentation case. He picked up the final card and smiled quietly before closing the box once again. He no longer needed the experiment. The answer he had been searching for could never be measured by spending limits or account balances. It could only be recognized through daily choices repeated when no reward was expected. A week later, the board of directors gathered for the foundation's annual review. One member congratulated Nathaniel on selecting such an exceptional executive director and finally asked the question many had wondered for months. What made you trust someone with so much responsibility after only knowing her for a few weeks? Nathaniel looked around the room before answering with calm certainty. Because she was the only person who understood that money is a responsibility before it is a privilege. Everyone nodded thoughtfully, but Nathaniel knew there was one part he left unsaid. Claire had not merely changed the direction of a foundation. She had quietly restored something inside him that success had almost erased. As the meeting ended, Nathaniel glanced toward the window where the evening sun reflected across the city skyline. The buildings looked exactly as they always had, yet somehow the world appeared different because he was finally seeing it through a clearer measure of wealth. Real prosperity was never found in what people could afford to buy. It lived in the promises they kept, the dignity they protected, the kindness they practiced when nobody was watching, and the quiet wisdom to recognize that enough can sometimes be the richest word a person will ever learn.